Standalone components are those components that enable us to build applications without using NgModules. Standalone components specify their dependencies directly and can run without NgModule. So, basic advantage of standalone components is that we need not to use NgModule. To mark a component, directive and pipe as standalone, we just have to use standalone true in @component decorator. The standalone API is introduced in Angular 15. The advantages of writing standalone components are simplified and reduced coding. And of course, we don't have to use NgModule. To resolve dependencies in standalone components, we use imports attribute within @component decorator. A standalone component can import modules, standalone components, standalone directives, and standalone pipes. Standalone component is bootstrapped using bootstrap application from src main.ts file. I have already created an application using standalone application. First of all, let us understand the structure of the standalone Angular application. This is the app component, and as we don't have to use NgModule, so mark it standalone using standalone true within @component decorator. Now create a config file in this way. This is application config constant, and here we configure providers and other configurations. So my constant of application config is app config. Okay. Now come to the main.ts. Within bootstrap application, assign your main component, that is app component, and app config, that is the constant of application config. App component has the selector app root, and there is no change in this. It is included here in the body index.html. So basically this is the structure of standalone component. What we have to do, our component needs to be marked as standalone, create a constant of application config. Here you will configure your providers and other configurations, and these two things, application app component and this application config constant, need to be mentioned in main.ts within bootstrap application. So this was the basic configuration of standalone application. So whenever we create a component, we have to mark it standalone. Not only component, pipe, directive, look here, this is a directive. We don't have to mention anything in an NgModule, just mark it standalone using standalone colon true. Okay. I have one more component, person component. This component is also in marked as standalone colon true. App component is using person component and MSG directive. So app component can only use other components and directive when we import them. Just use imports within @component and configure here your directives and other components that have the dependency in this component. In app component.html, I am using this component. So app component has the dependency of person component because I am using a person component here. MSG directive is being used here. So I have the dependency of MSG directive and person component in app component. So we just understand that my app component has the dependency of person component and MSG directive because my app.component.html is using them. This is directive and this is the component. We also have to import any module if it is required here. Router module, because our app component.html is using router outlet. So we have to resolve this dependency. If we are using if directive, ngIf directive, ngFor directive, ngSwitch, then we need to import here common module. Okay. So in this way, we have understood how to create component, standalone component, and how to import other standalone components in a component where it is required. We have also understood how to create standalone directive. We have just marked it standalone true and nothing. and wherever it is required, that component has to import it. Okay, now let us understand routing. Suppose this is our roots, no change, nothing. We need to configure this constant in app config using provide router. So the role of provide router is to configure routes. If we don't provide it, there will be error. So use provide router to configure routes. Now let us understand about the service class. I have already created a service. Service can already be configured as in this way using provided in colon root, and then it can be used. It can be injected in components directive. If we have not used provided in colon root, means in old style, if I have services in old style, means it is only using injectable decorator. In this case, we have to configure it within providers, and then we can inject in our component and directive. So this was a application that was just using standalone components directive and a service and a root. We can understand one more time. Every components and directive and pipes must be marked using standalone colon true. Whenever a directive requires another directive or a component requires another component directive, then they have to import them, and also if that requires any module dependency, that need also be imported. And main.ts have to be have to include app component and this constant, and this constant is application config, where we have configured providers and other configurations. This application is running, it has no issue, and we can see router is working. If you don't provide router, use provide router, then it will not work. The error will be error null injector error. It means we have to provide it. App component is using standalone true. If we don't mark it standalone, application will not run. Okay. If we don't import our component and directive, application will not run and there will be error. So in this way we understood how to use standalone components in our Angular application. Thank you.